Welcome to Just Want to Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. I am Elizabeth Townsend-Gard. I'm a law professor there, and I specialize in copyrights, trademarks, entrepreneurship, art law, and of course, I am obsessed with quilting. This is our 2023 season, and today our guest is Eric Goldman. He is a law professor at Santa Clara University School of Law, where he is an associate dean for research. He also does a ton of scholarship. He is like the craziest producer of material. He has a blog that I write for sometimes as a guest blogger, and it's amazing. His technology and marketing law blog is just the place to go if you're keeping up with technology and law kinds of things. He is also he teaches internet law, so he knows a lot about internet law, and he has a huge Slinky collection. We'll talk about that a little bit. And he's just a loads of fun and really supportive. He's a little bit ahead of me in terms of career, and so I've turned to him a lot for advice over the years. He is also very important in our trademark field, and there is a Supreme Court case now up, and also Section 230, which is two cases at the Supreme Court about Section 230, which is about the internet. So we had him on as a guest, and I couldn't be more thrilled.
My name is Eric Goldman, and I'm calling in today from Mountain View, California.
Nice. And what's your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life?
Well, that's a good question. My grandmas both did various forms of sewing, knitting, and other needlework. And I don't remember when I can first state that, but it was always, I think, a part of their lives growing up in the generation they did.
Yeah, interesting. All right, so you are a professor, and you are prolific professor on many levels. And I'm curious, sort of, how did you get to where you are? How did you get to being, like, did you always want to be a professor? Sort of, how did you get to doing what you do?
So when I graduated undergraduate, I went into commercial real estate back in Southern California in the late 1980s. It was a good time to be in real estate in Southern California, and it was, I think, pretty interesting for me. So when I went back to graduate school, I went for a JD MBA, and I planned to go and become a real estate developer. That was always my vision when I went to grad school. I was going to go and build skyscrapers or apartment buildings in the Southern California market. For the listeners who don't remember, the early 1990s was a trough economically, and Southern California was slow to respond. So my idea was I was going to wait it out while I was in graduate school, and by the time I came to the market would have rebounded, and we would have been excited to see me. But while I was in graduate school, starting in 1991, I fell in love with the internet. I got my first email account, and it just blew my mind. It was a life-changing moment for me. Starting in 1992, I decided that actually what I really loved was internet law, not real estate law or real estate development. And so I repurposed all of my career efforts towards becoming an internet lawyer. At the time, I didn't have any plans to be a professor. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I started practicing internet law in the Silicon Valley in 1994, had a great ride. But I also thought it'd be fun to share my expertise in internet law with students. So I did the typical thing. I contacted the local law school and said, hey, can I teach a class in internet law? And first University of San Francisco and then Santa Clara University said, sure. It was pretty much how formal it was. And that got me on the path of thinking about being a professor in a way that I hadn't previously thought about. I love being an adjunct, but it was really when I was made a switch from law firm to an in-house company. I was their general counsel. The company was not doing well. It was clear I was going to need to make a move. But I made a strategic analysis of my life, and I thought maybe I can become a professor full-time. And that is how I decided to apply. Back in 2001, I applied for law professor jobs, lucky enough to get one. And so it was really an iterative process, first from real estate to internet, then from internet lawyer to internet law professor.
Really interesting. And then you moved. You were somewhere else, and then is that right? Were you at Marquette? Where were you? I can't remember where you
Yeah,
were.
so when I applied to become a law professor, I went into the standard process. For listeners don't know, there's a meeting place set up by the industry association between hiring schools and candidates. And I applied to all the schools in the nation, and I met with a bunch of them at this conference. And the offer that came through was from Marquette University in Milwaukee. Now, if I could have stayed in Santa Clara, where I was literally teaching as an adjunct at the time, that would have been my preference. That wasn't on the table.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to go to Marquette, had a great experience at Marquette. But when the door opened back up at Santa Clara University, I was lucky to come back.
That's really cool. Yes, when you say that, there's a kind of sense like all the memory of that huge Marriott, isn't it Marriott in DC, and sort of that whole thing. It is such a moment of. It's just such a moment, and the level of anxiety and what it is, and running from room to room. It's such a thing as part of our profession. It's crazy.
Among the many stresses of that process was it really was 100% on me.
Yeah.
So much of the work that I do in life is a partnership with my wife. But
Yeah.
when I was in that conference, there was nothing she could do to help. It was all on my shoulders. If we were going to accomplish this goal for the family,
Yeah.
I had to do it. And I felt a lot of stress about that.
Yeah, I get that. Tell me more about what you mean by everything is a partnership with your wife, usually. Tell me more about that.
I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Different couples have different relationships, but in our relationship, we have, I think, what many people call very traditional or old school division of labor. Generally, I'm the one that's bringing in the money, and she's the one that's taking care of the household and the kids. But everything we do is a joint decision, and anything that matters to our family,
Yeah.
I discuss with my wife. We consult on it, and it has to be mutual. So for me, every move that I make, every choice that I've made, always is a conversation.
That's really nice. Yeah, for Ron and I too. He was, I'm academically a little ahead of him in terms of years. So when I was on the market, he was still doing his PhD work. But it was stressful because it was like, well, it's very like you don't know where you're going to end up. It's not like you're like, I want to go here, right? It is a crazy system that kind of throws families into it's. I mean, it's not military, but it's kind of weirder because you end up one place and then you're there for a really long time. People do move, but it's still it is hard on families, I think.
When we moved from Silicon Valley to Milwaukee to take the job at Marquette, it was a mutual decision. That absolutely had to be a joint conclusion. And we had to do it planning that we might be there for the rest of our lives.
I know, exactly.
And
exactly.
So maybe life will change and open up other doors, but the most likely scenario was that we were going to stay exactly there.
Right? Like your kids, you're going to raise your kids in the place. So we had a couple of choices when I was on the market. And one of them was Dayton, and Dayton's very nice, but we had been living in London with the kid, and the kid was like 3, maybe, or 3 or 4 at the time, and she was like, where's the Eiffel Tower? Because we'd been to Paris. Where's there, whatever? And we were like, baby, this is it. They were like, it was like, this is going to be a very different life than like the kid growing up in London or something. But even at 3 or 4, she was like, well, where? And then we went to the museum there. And again, Dayton was very nice, and it was a nice offer and all of that. But they had squirrels, like they had stuffed squirrels in their natural history museum. And that set off the kid again. So I thought, okay, well, we're happy we ended up in New Orleans. But it was an interesting moment of like, what is our life going to be like in a very different place, like very suburban, very quiet kind of life. So you think about your kids when you're in that situation too. Because again, we haven't moved since we've been in New Orleans the whole time. So yeah, I don't know. It's all interesting. It's a very weird process. Okay. So Eric is one of the most awesome people in the field of our IP field. And he's fun and ridiculous and super smart and super prolific and kind of the most generous person I know in terms of his time and helping young scholars and everything. So
your listeners should know that I'm blushing here. They can't see it.
No, it's really true. You help set a standard of how we all are. And I feel like we're a really generous, kind group. We're all quirky in different ways. And to prove your quirkiness, the two things I want to talk about before 2:30 is first your Slinky collection. Do you still have your Slinky collection? And how did that start?
Yeah, to me, it's odd that you classify Slinky collection as a quirk, because to me that just seems totally
I
natural and
understand. I
normal. And
do.
why
Well,
wouldn't
I feel that way
everyone
about
want one?
quilting, right? So we all have our we believe in what we do, and so yes, indeed.
So I had a Slinky in my car that I just bought at one of the 99-cent stores a long time ago. And it was just sitting there. And on one of our first dates with my wife, now wife, of course, she was just someone I was dating at the time, we were driving around and she was playing with the Slinky and she kinked it. And she, was just nervous fidgeting or whatever. But, once the Slinky is kinked, you can't fix it. It's permanently changed. And so she felt bad about that. I didn't really care. It was 99-cent store purchase, but she felt bad. So then she bought me a package of Slinkies to try and compensate for having destroyed my one as a way of trying to make up for it. And so then that got us interested in the idea that there are more than one type of Slinky, and that there, people have done all kinds of interesting variations on them. And so then, of course, my, obsessiveness took over, and I'm like, well, let's collect them all. Let's find every variation of Slinky and try and put them into a collection. So I have hundreds of Slinkies. It is really quite a substantial collection, though it is fairly clear at this point that I do not have the largest collection in the world. In fact, someone has certified themselves in the Guinness Book of World Records as having the largest Slinky collection. I am not that person. And I think there's a couple other people I've run into over the years who have bigger collections. I will say that it's just become harder to find Slinkies in the last 30 years. They're still out there, but I haven't seen as much innovation or iteration. So my collection rate has slowed. Plus, my wife has basically banned any new Slinkies in the house. There's no more room. So yeah, I still have it. I still love it, but it's been eclipsed, I think, in my quirkiness, which is probably what we're getting to next.
Yes. So other things that you've become obsessed with, help us understand. I think that for our audience, we get obsession because I think quilters are people that are basically get obsessed with whatever it is, whatever version of quilting they are interested in at that moment. So they get it. And I think they're all in, and then they move on or they add something to whatever they're obsessed with. So what are your other obsessions now if you're not collecting Slinkies at
So assuming this is what you were planning to raise anyway,
yeah.
I'll go there for you. So in the more recent era, my collections have focused more on emojis.
Yes.
So I monitor cases that come out regularly. I read several thousand cases every year. And in one of those times, I was just reading in case randomly, there was a reference to emojis. And I thought that was really interesting. I wonder how many times courts have discussed emojis. And so I did some back research to find all the cases that discussed emojis and their predecessors, emoticons. I turned that into a paper that I wrote that ultimately I published in 2018. And so I have become one of the world's leading experts in emoji law. Now I say that it is a self-representation, but
That's
actually
totally
a TV newscaster actually introduced me as one of the leading and only emoji law experts.
Right.
And I felt like that hit the nail right on the head.
Right.
I've become one of the leaders simply because there's no competition for that status. So as part of doing emoji law, I have also then started collecting emoji related items. Of course, my most prized collection is the Slinkies that have emojis on them. That's a double win.
Of course. I don't know if I've sent it to you, but I do have a book that someone gave me for you. The publisher gave it to me on emoji quilts. So I'll have to send that to you.
Emoji quilts, that's it, right? Any of your listeners
Indeed.
who are doing emoji quilts, I am cheering, I'm cheering you on. Yes, that's exactly what the world needs.
I got a question from Quilt Folk. I think they're a really important magazine for us because they were doing an emoji quilt and had legal questions. I think I sent them on to you because I was
I advised one of my students, this was a while ago, that quilting law was like an open field. If somebody ever wanted to own quilting law, other than you, of course,
Other
because
than
you
me,
are, in
indeed.
fact, one of the